Okay. We are not, right now we start the webinar. Go ahead, please. Thanks.
We can't see the people. Oh.
I think you're joining. I'm seeing on the left tab numbers there.
Oh, right.
Saying 30, 40 something.
56, 59, 60. All right. And rising.
Oh, Mariana's there.
So should we start, Innocent?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're just giving some few minutes for those other people who are joining, but I think we can start. I see over 70 people have already joined us, and I'm sure the numbers are going to increase as we proceed. So I will start if we all agree. Dr. Jane, Dr. Andy, Dr. Thomas, are we all good?
All good.
Super. So welcome to today. Super. Welcome to today's webinar. I am Innocent and I will be your facilitator today. I'm delighted to have you all joining us today. For those of you who may not be aware, the Evolve Forward and Earth Evolve communities of practice on evaluation, they recently merged to form Evolve for Earth community of practice. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to our very first webinar under the new community of practice. This webinar is very important for so many reasons. I will just highlight, three. The first one, addressing sustainability in evaluations aligns very well with Evolve for Earth's mission. That is to promote a holistic approach to food security, agriculture, and rural development. That includes both environmental and sustainability, social equity. Secondly, by focusing on sustainability and equity, this webinar will help align evaluations with the global development agenda, especially the Sustainable Development Goal number 2, zero hunger, and environmental goals, ensuring that evaluations not only assess outcomes, but also contribute to more sustainable and equitable solutions globally. Lastly, as the first webinar for the merged community for Evolve for Earth, it sets the stage for future learning, collaboration, and networking opportunities, bringing together all of you. I'm sure amongst you, we have evaluators, we have development practitioners, we have policymakers, who will be able to then engage in meaningful conversations on how evaluations can address environmental and gender equity issues. Now, without further ado, I will introduce our distinguished speakers for today. In no order, I'll start with Dr. Andy Roy. He's a principal at Arc Economics with over 30 years of evaluation experience across North America, Africa, Asia, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. His current work includes evaluations of the United Food and Agriculture Organizations, FAO, climate change efforts, and the UN environmental programs, fifth global environment outlook. Welcome, Dr. Andy. Secondly, I will move over to Dr. Jane Davidson. She's joining us from the USA, a founder and principal consultant at Real Evaluation. She's an internationally recognized evaluation specialist known for developing evaluation rubrics for assessing quality and value. She has made significant contributions to causal inference for qualitative and mixed methods and to synthesis methodologies for evaluations. All of these and more are covered in her textbook, Evaluation Methodology Basics. In her textbook, Evaluation Methodology Basics. Welcome, Dr. Jane, and thank you for joining us today. Lastly, I will move over to Dr. Thomas K. Chianga, who is joining us from Brazil. He's a managing partner of Comeia Relevant Evaluations. He has conducted and managed evaluation work in more than 25 countries. His focus is on enhancing the impact and learning capacity of philanthropic, government, international development, NGOs, and corporate clients. Welcome, Dr. Thomas, and thank you for joining us today. Now, let me just briefly walk you through today's agenda. That is the agenda for the discussion which I'm going to have today. So after these short introductory remarks from my end, I'll just quickly move over to the three distinguished speakers who are going to give us a combined presentation covering a range of topics. But please, not as they are speaking, as they are going through the presentation, please feel free to post any questions in the chat and we'll address them during the Q&A session. Then after that, we just move over to have some concluding remarks from one of the speakers, and I'll wrap up today's webinar. But lastly, just before we start, let me just remind you quickly of some few housekeeping issues. Please mute your microphones if they're not muted by default, but I think they are. But in case they are not, just when you're not speaking, please just keep it muted to minimize background noise. And if you wish to speak during the Q&A session, please use the raise hand function. I'll be able to see you and we'll give you the platform to speak. But in case you feel shy and you don't want to speak, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A tab. I will make sure that I have a look on that. Lastly, let's just be mindful of the cultural differences and let's ensure respectful and inclusive language. Thank you once again all for joining, and let's dive into today's session. Doctors, it's over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We really prioritize this session. We think it's the general sector of agriculture is of critical importance to a sustainable and just planet. We want to start by acknowledging that Jane and I, Jane in the northeast of the US, me in the Jane in the northwest of the US, me in the southwest of the US on Vancouver Island. We're on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, a territory that crosses both of the Canada and US territories. And we recognize that the Coast Salish people and all Indigenous people have lived in harmony, have harmony with the environment, and have sovereignty over their traditional lands. And we respect and learn from them. It's on footprint evaluation. We formed footprint evaluation about 6 years ago. Jane, Patricia Rogers, Dugan Fraser, and myself. And our ambition was to develop the tools and processes that evaluators would need when they start turning to incorporate sustainability in their work. So could I go to the next slide, please? I'm sure that you're all aware of the tensions of agriculture and environment. and livelihoods and equity. And they include things like human life depends on agriculture. Agriculture is a major source of environmental harm, yet we urgently need food security for the vulnerable. We need food for humanitarian needs. An important share of the rural poor rely on agriculture, and agricultural livelihoods and value chains are weak. And also that since the middle of the last decade, most or many agencies have adopted climate and environment directives. But it's not unusual to see the bulk of development directed towards human system concerns. For example, climate adaptation for smallholders, addressing livelihoods, value chain, etc., but not attending to the environmental effects. The thinking behind this is a mindset founded on or thinking, as in you can have environment or equity, you can have sustainability or economy. That's not what we need now. Sustainability thinking, these couple systems that we work in agriculture and elsewhere, requires an and thinking, A and D, as in environment and equity and economy. We need to find solutions that address them all. And that's the mindset that evaluators need to take in evaluating these interventions. Can I go to the next slide, please? Now, you would think that if you consider human system effects and natural system effects and apply evaluative reasoning, you would get valid conclusions. Can you click again? But systematically, in over 95% of the evaluation environment, publications, evaluations, etc., natural systems are ignored. That means that we're drawing invalid conclusions. And this has got to be really troubling for evaluators, because our primary goal is to assess the merit or worth of interventions. And if we're systematically getting it wrong, and if we're systematically, therefore, by ignoring environment, returning falsely positive assessments of what we evaluate, then we're actually contributing to worsening environmental conditions. If we applaud agriculture for improving and don't recognize that it's still harming the environment, we don't encourage, we don't incentivize, we don't direct programs and interventions towards more sustainable interventions and stopping and really reducing the amount of harm caused to the environment by agriculture. Next slide, final slide. So just imagine what it's going to be like in 5 to 10 years, what your life is going to be like in 5 to 10 years. As climate increasingly and relentlessly gets worse and worse, we have more drought, more severe conditions, more wildfires, as ecosystems start collapsing. Every single decision maker will be under intense pressure to show what they're doing. If we don't start including environment in all of our evaluations now, we will not be able to provide them with anything that will help them respond to those situations. So the time to gear up is now. We have to do this now. This isn't something that we can wait for guidance to appear and eventually find our way to adopting that guidance. We need, all evaluators need to start doing this now. I'm going to pass over to Jane.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So let's dive into some of the nuts and bolts of how you can make sure that both equity and sustainability are on the agenda for all the evaluation work that you're involved in. Our first tip here is to prioritize influencing how decision makers think. Let me explain a little bit about that. So most evaluations tend to focus on instrumental use, which is about making improvements to the current policy or initiative, whatever is being evaluated. But when we think about the long game here, what's more important is that decision makers experience what we call light bulb moments, realizations that they can never unsee, they may or may not be able to apply these new understandings to whatever is being evaluated right now, but they will forever be reminded of this issue the next time that they're involved in policy making or initiative design. And this is what we need long term. I'm now going to pass to Thomas to talk about how to cut this down to size.
So what's the best way to create those light bulb moments that Jane just mentioned to us? Remember first that less is more. If we include every environmental issue we can think of, their eyes will just glaze over and they will tune out. But if we pick 2 or 3 important environmental issues and explain them well, we can better influence decision makers rather than overwhelm them. And here are some tips on ways that you can select the issues to focus on. The first one is to consider is the most important environmental impacts. You know, look at them, and those are the large effects or impacts on critical or threatened parts of the ecosystem. Then the second one, look at issues where equity and sustainability are clearly both at stake. Those are the issues that are more people will be caring about. Third one, look at issues that have broad relevance, not just for the initiative, but for the sector or the country more generally. That's what we call the insights with legs. The fourth one is issues that are currently high on the radar of people in the sector or the country. These are the opportunities that are created due to salience. Fifth, think about any consequences of including or excluding particular issues. And finally, think about the implications for conceptual use. So how well the issues that you want to pick will help decision makers see things differently long term. And I'm turning it back to
me.
Andy. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane and Thomas. Now, let me just summarize briefly what we're saying. We're saying basically that evaluation is getting it wrong, and we're potentially contributing to worsening climatic and environmental conditions. We're saying that roughly, and we haven't actually said this, but we know from stock takings that natural systems have a presence of roughly 5% in evaluation globally. That means inclusion in published material, guidance, conference sessions, etc. So we're saying we're getting it wrong. It doesn't have a strong presence. If we look at interventions, we'll see that they now acknowledge the guidance from the middle of the last decade to address environment and climate sustainability, equity, etc. But it's often just a checkbox approach. They check that they're going to do it, but in fact, there's very little within the intervention that does it. And Jane has spoken to the urgency of what we need. The time to do it is now. So when we present this to people, their eyes glaze over and panic comes in their eyes. And they do so because they're thinking that they have to get to instrumental use. But as Jane has clearly said, we just have to turn on the light bulbs. And in any case, a lot of the interventions aren't doing anything in terms of environment and environmental sustainability. So there isn't a lot of applied research we can do. What we need is to focus on the things, the methods that will turn on those light bulbs. Can I go to the next slide, please? And there's a lot of material that already exists in natural system, in natural sciences. So all we have to do is as Thomas has said, find the key moments, the key junctures, the key audiences to take our conceptual use messages, to use whatever we can reach to inform that and present really clear arguments towards that. And one of the most important things, can I go to the next slide, slide 12? One of the most important things is bringing in a boundary spanner, someone who can span between the natural systems and human systems, guide people to usable knowledge that is efficient and effective for the evaluation, that can be used without breaking the budget, without breaking the timelines. And we have proof of concept that this is possible by applying within mixed methods evaluation approaches. We have proof of concept that several of those methods that we've tested actually are very amenable to addressing environment, including environment and sustainability, without breaking the budget, without bursting the timelines. One of the most important things we suggest to people is that local and indigenous knowledge holders are really critical. They know, they observe what's going on in their space, in their communities, in their traditional territories. And often we conduct evaluations and only bring them in at the end as information sources. They're knowledge holders that are important to the design of the evaluations. So we can do this. This is within reach. We need to do this. We need to focus on conceptual use and use what we can gather to bring us to good conclusions that will turn on those light bulbs. Over to Jane.
Okay, so we know where to get hold of the expertise, and now let's talk about what that group of experts then can help you do. So now most evaluations will use, hopefully, a set of key evaluation questions to guide the work. This presents another great opportunity to get sustainability on the agenda. One of the first and most practical things we can do is to make sure that our evaluation questions address not just the human system issues to be evaluated, but instead take a coupled systems perspective. So here's what that looks like. Typically, food security evaluation questions or questions on agriculture might look something like this. They tend to focus on production and livelihoods, which are both human system issues, even though they're working on the land. If you look at the revised version of this question on the right, this reflects the need to address both the human system issues and the natural system issues that affect and are affected in all food security or agricultural initiatives. We're up to. So if you're looking for guidance on how to write sustainability inclusive and coupled systems evaluation questions, we have a guidance document for that, which is available in both English and Spanish. Many thanks to the German Institute for Development Evaluation, DEVAL, who did the Spanish translation. These are free to download, and the QR code's there on the screen. Okay, handing over to Thomas for another example of sustainability inclusive questions.
Thank you, Jane. So one important contribution the Footprint Evaluation Initiative has made was applying the concept of asking coupled system questions that Jane just presented to us now to the OECD DAC criteria. As many of you already know and have experienced, most evaluations commissioned by international development agencies and many international NGOs and foundations also are required to use the 6 OECD DAC criteria to frame these evaluations. They have been around for several years and are extensively used worldwide. And we have developed some ideas about how to apply the DAC criteria in a sustainable, inclusive way. As you can see here, the short form questions that people usually refer to on the 6 criteria focus primarily on human systems, completely ignoring the natural systems effects. Yes, even if we look at the sustainability criterion, that we would have some hope there, it's still focused mostly on durability and nothing about the natural systems. So the footprint evaluation team took the liberty of reframing these to become coupled systems sustainability inclusive questions. For instance, for the impact criterion, one of the very important ones, we ask, how beneficial or detrimental are the interventions effects for both human and natural systems in the long term? That's a coupled system evaluation question. And we have also created a guide explaining how to use the OECD DAC criteria in a sustainability inclusive way. The guide is also freely available. The QR codes are there for both the English and the Spanish version, thanks to Dival that helped with the translation. Now we'll turn back to Jane that will be guiding us through reasoning and clear evaluative conclusions.
Thanks, Thomas. So if we ask these great coupled systems evaluation questions, and particularly thinking about the sustainability one of our most important tasks as evaluators is to make sure that the answers to those questions are crystal clear so that decision makers know not just what's happening, but how beneficial or problematic any effects are that we're uncovering so that they can figure out what to address first and fast and with what level of urgency. We've got 3 different ways you can do this that we're going to talk about, using the footprint evaluation typology, using rubrics as a particular way to apply that typology, and then a new framework that we've just started thinking about is the equity sustainability matrix. So here's the typology, which was originally developed for an IFAD evaluation of smallholder adaptation to climate. Andy's going to show you that example shortly, so I won't talk about it now. But most of the efforts, if you look at that 4-level scale, most of the efforts that we see tend to be in the sustainability aware space, in the orange zone, where there is some attempt to be less harmful to the environment, but unfortunately damage is still happening. So that's one light bulb moment that we need decision makers to have. The other one is that doing no more harm to the natural system isn't enough. Historically, we have done so much damage already that the only really beneficial practices and initiatives have to be actively restorative, not just unharmful. We have 2 applications of the typology to share with you. One that works really well with smaller numbers and mostly qualitative data, and one that works better when you've got larger numbers and mostly quantitative data. So Andy's going to talk about the IFAD example, and then Thomas about Colombia.
Thanks, Jane. I'm guessing that some of you are from IFAD, and welcome. And it's great. The work that was done in a thematic evaluation of IFAD support for climate adaptation for smallholder farmers was the subject of the evaluation. Sustainability was included as an add-on. The original design and building of the team, recruiting external consultants, et cetera, was all done. And then we started to think about, well, why don't we include environmental sustainability? And the response of Nancy, the team leader, was, yes, let's do that. And he carved out a small section of the budget, I'm guessing around $30,000, to dedicate to this. The larger evaluation included 30 country studies, 30 case studies, and of that, about 20 of them proceeded to actually be included in the evaluation. One of the constraints we faced was this was during COVID. And sometimes there was in-country support for the evaluation. Sometimes there were paper exercises. But one key thing was that the team, which was fairly large, I think there were 9 of us on the evaluation team. The evaluation team had very strong capacity in coupled systems. They applied in their work, they applied and thinking. They didn't think we can have livelihoods or environmental sustainability. They thought, how can we have environmental sustainability and livelihoods and food security and all the other stuff together? So that was the lens they brought to the case studies. And that meant that the case studies, which were quite extensive, were very rich in resources. So as a resource, so I took the case studies, the written case studies, and I created a file for each of the studies, any reference to natural systems, sustainability, etc. And then I formed a judgment from that. We then reviewed that with the case study author and revised as necessary. Then we went to the entire team, evaluation team, revised as necessary. Then we went to the within IFAD to the sort of project lead or responsible person, and then to the country and regional people. So we did this circulation, moving upwards, always revising, always taking account of people's reservations and concerns and corrections. And so we ended up with basically a statement. Can I go to the next slide, please? A statement that was included in the draft evaluation, and then the evaluation unit took it from there through the higher levels in IFAD. Now, this is our result. And as Jane said, most of the stuff was in the harmful area. But what really struck us was that about 30% were already reaching do no harm. Now, if you think of a normal evaluator, what would your messaging be about this? It would be, oh my God, 70%, 3/4 of what we do is making the environment worse. And by making the environment, the local environment worse, we're actually undermining all our efforts to build sustainable farming. That would be the wrong message. The right message is, it's incredible. Already, IFAD, 30% of the interventions are achieving do no harm levels. And some are going beyond do no harm, moving towards beneficial or restorative work. That's amazing, because don't forget, agriculture is inherently harmful to environment. Agriculture is inherently harmful to the environment. The more progressive agricultural methods we have, climate smart agriculture, et cetera, help to reduce the harm, as this slide shows. So the application of those help to reduce the harm, but they still cause harm. So the message we're giving is, we still have more to do, but you know how to do it. So just do more of that. If you think of a normal evaluation within the UN system using the satisfactory, not satisfactory approach, most of the interventions that would say 70% harmful would be saying this is actually satisfactory, or this is mostly satisfactory. That's a much less compelling message. That doesn't turn on the light bulbs the way that making clear, as Jane has said, clear evaluative statements does. Can I go to the next slide, please? So when we were working with Global Affairs Canada, it's one of these conditions where what is blindingly obvious to intelligent people is obscure to me. So Jane suggested, why don't we do, instead of just doing topology, combine that with human system effects, mainly equity ones. And that led to this, this matrix that you see here, which is how we now approach things. And if you go to the next slide, just imagine that we have 20 projects. Again, we didn't in the IFAD evaluation, we didn't look at the human system effects arm of the matrix. But you can just imagine that the distribution might look like this. This is imaginary, this isn't real. And again, this is a real light bulb for decision makers. Because in the sustainability aware, one of them is extractive of women in historically marginalized groups. It's aware but of environment, but it's dreadful in terms of what it's doing natural systems. 3 of the sustainability aware also are contributing to equitable systems and are reaching the do no harm threshold. This is really instructive. They can look at their interventions. You can learn specifically about what's going on. These are real opportunities for light bulb moments. So that's one case study. And I just want to end by saying this was a case study method because of the circumstances we had, COVID, et cetera. That provided limited information gathering opportunities. And that really didn't impair in actual sense. What we did was we trialed a case study mixed methods approach, and it worked. We were able to bring environmental sustainability in with a minimum budget, with minimum changes to the methodologies we were planning to do, and we reached really clear evaluative decisions, observations on that. Tomas is going to now talk about work we're doing in Colombia.
Thank you, Andy. So let's show you another example of how to apply the typology, the footprint typology, and this time using rubrics methodology. We're going to talk about it in a minute. So we are talking about our ongoing work to support the Colombian Department of National Planning to conduct a sustainability inclusive evaluation of the efficiency and effectiveness of the IT systems that are managed by the Colombian government. So among several other things, 110 governmental entities participated in a survey that included, among several other questions, 10 specifically multiple choice questions on sustainability. Evaluation rubrics were developed to help interpret the survey results. The rubric criteria were translated into what we called an algorithm to generate ratings for each one of the entities. And in the next slides, we'll give you a quick helicopter tour on how we did it. So this work is a country-led evaluation that's being implemented in partnership involving several different organizations. First, the Colombian Department of National Planning is the main organization and is managing the whole evaluation. And the evaluation is being implemented by 3 consulting firms, Ipsos, Carbon Box, and Iopiplex. Carbon Box is the one specialized in environmental and climate issues and is the one that we are working more closely with. We are providing technical support, the Footprint Evaluation Initiative, boundary spanning and capacity building on the sustainability inclusive part of the overall evaluation. And we have received support from DVAL and also the Global Evaluation Initiative to do this work. Given the amplitude, the breadth of the evaluation, it had to rely heavily on quantitative methods. So they surveyed 110 governmental entities that host IT systems, and those organizations ranged from federal ministries, national institutes and agencies, pension funds, and several other types. And the Carbon Box team was able to include 10 sustainability relevant questions into the more than 100 items survey. So when Carbon Box received the survey results, a big challenge was to interpret those results, the survey results, and classify each entity, synthesize that information so that they could say where each entity was placed according to the footprint typology. So we helped them by developing evaluative rubrics to make it explicit what it would look like if entities, IT systems were benefiting, the green zone, being neutral, doing no harm or nor benefiting, the gray zone, being harmful but trying to do something good, the orange zone, or being destructive, completely ignoring sustainability, that's in the red zone. Here we are presenting just the example of the rubric we've created to assess how efficient the entities were in terms of water use, based on 3 questions related to this topic that were included in that survey. For each rating, we described what the evidence would look like at that level. So that's what the rubric comprised of. We also created what we are calling now an algorithm for combining the answers to the 3 questions so that we can get to a rating. For instance, if an entity answered yes to all questions, these that are highlighted there, H61, HB81, H91, meaning that they have an ongoing water conservation and efficient use program. The IT teams have participated in campaigns on water conservation and efficient use. And they also have calculated the water footprint of the buildings where the IT systems are located. Then the entity is considered to have strong sustainability practice. It's important to note, as Jane has already mentioned just recently, that that entity is still in the harmful, in the orange zone. It's trying to do something good, minimizing its harm to the environment, but it's still harming it. So you notice that the top 2 rows, restorative and no net harm, in the 3rd column read not possible to assess using survey data. And that's because IT systems by nature are inherently harmful to the environment, given that all the emissions, water use, and relatively low recyclability involving in all the value chain, manufacturing, transportation, operations, and disposal of the IT equipment and peripherals. If we could estimate IT systems' contributions to make other processes and systems more efficient in terms of using natural resources, or if we could find out whether the entity was implementing compensatory activities or programs to offset the harm they are causing, or even producing positive impacts that could help restore the natural systems, then we could determine whether the entities were being neutral or beneficial to the environment. Unfortunately, these estimations or questions were not within the scope of this evaluation, and therefore, it was a tight budget. We had a very tight timeline, so we could not rate any of the entities in the top 2 levels of the rubric, at the moment at least. Okay, so another major challenge that Carbon Box was facing was how to show the results. How to synthesize clearly what we were seeing. And we wanted to do it just using one graph to show how the 110 Colombian agencies are doing on sustainable practices in the IT systems area. So we opted for this bubble graph that you're seeing here, with a few features that we hope make it easier to interpret. First, we've used color-coded bubbles and rating labels in the y-axis here that match the footprint typology from restorative to ignoring sustainability. Then we have icons along the x-axis representing the 4 areas that we have rated, general systems, greenhouse gases emissions, water use, and circularity. And note that all the labels use words as well as colors, which helps ensure that whoever is reading it with any form that color blindness, we'll still be able to read the graph. And finally, alongside the top two levels, restorative and no net harm, we included a note explaining why these ratings were not possible to make with the evidence we had, and why it's possible that some agencies may in fact be performing at this more sustainable levels if they are also taking restorative actions. The good news is that we found through this exercise that 110 entities, 3 of the 110 entities were rated as using strong sustainable practices on all 4 rubrics that we developed. So we think that the Department of National Planning may wish to learn from these entities on how they are achieving this positive results. And we think that insights from this reflection may help other agencies as they work to improve their environmental sustainability. So finally, on the Colombia example here, it's important to mention that our work with them focuses heavily on capacity building and technical assistance. This past August, we run a series of workshops for government ministries, monitoring, evaluation, research staff, and for local evaluators, also environmental organizations and academics who work with the Colombian government. We have been providing technical assistance to the Department of National Planning staff, as well as the evaluation team, to help them navigate the many challenges that come up during the sustainability inclusive evaluation process. And we hope they will get a good grip of the footprint evaluation principles and main ideas so that they will be better equipped to consider including sustainability across their entire evaluation system. So this is an ongoing process, and it's very rich, and what we're showing to you are things that have just evolved in the past 3 or 4 weeks. And so we are very excited with this work. Now I'm going to pass it on to Jane.
Thanks, Tomas. So you've seen, we've just shown you a glimpse of a few of the tools and frameworks that we've got available for free from Footprint Evaluation. We're continually adding to those all the time. And we also hope that you've been inspired by the stories, the 2 examples that we've given you from IFAD and from the Colombian government. So hopefully you're super excited to think, how can we get started? Like how do we get the most value out of trying this out and learning from it? Taking a dive into environmental sustainability, if you haven't been doing it, is an investment of your time and effort. But those early efforts provide huge opportunities, and we've learned some things from the projects that we've been working with about how you can get the most out of them wherever you're working. So as the piece that Tomas was talking about before, like one of the key things here is to do really smart capacity building. You can't just take a bunch of tools and frameworks and just give them to people and expect them to be able to use them immediately. So you need to pay some attention to involving the right people, helping them learn the nuts and bolts guided by experts so that you can build some capacity within your organization that will then be able to support others to use these frameworks. Involving other people at key points to encourage conceptual use, and then doing things like writing up guidelines so that you can keep that know-how in organizational memory, even if those people may move around the organization or go to other organizations. Thinking about conceptual use, like what kind of insights are going to be informative to stakeholders, finding ways to share what you've learned with other people who might be interested, maybe involving people from partner organizations on your next sustainability inclusive evaluation or offer to help them with theirs. So there's lots of opportunities where you can invite other stakeholders to do a joint project or support them, and try and get this cross-fertilization of ideas so that everybody's learning together, because that's what we're trying to do here. One of the things to really bear in mind is that, as Andy said earlier, this is not something that we can sit around and think we're going to be doing, you know, in another 10 or 15 years. We need to be thinking about the fact that 2030 is looming, with many of the tipping points in the environmental systems that and some of them we're already hitting. So this is a major problem. And one of the issues in a lot of our evaluation work is that the time frame for evaluations are so long. It's typically about 6 years from design to conclusion. In a typical development project, you've got evaluation happening at midpoint and the end of project. These timelines are way too long given the urgency of what we're seeing. So, you know, 2030 is only now 5 years into the future. And so by the time, if we were starting a project now, by the time it actually gets evaluated, 2030 will be upon us. So that the polycrisis that we're facing is undeniable and well recognized as part of the context. So evaluation needs to expect all of our interventions to be adaptive, forward-looking, and embedded in the current and expected settings shaped by increasing inequity and exploitation, severe weather, and by increasingly impaired natural systems. So our whole evaluation systems need to be much more nimble and you know, be able to give the information much more quickly. And so that's one of the reasons why we focus on creating light bulb moments and conceptual use to get these ideas into decision makers' heads now, rather than doing like huge in-depth analyses that might be too late to make a difference. One of the issues is that, you know, project design often marginalizes sustainability. It's seldom focused on, and quite often that means that evaluation does too, but we need to push back against that. So the evaluation function needs a serious redesign. We need to build equity and sustainability into program design and inception. We need to think about so instead of waiting for future effects to happen, we've got to have smart ways of assessing the likelihood of those things happening. We need much more rapid cycle process evaluation and real-time evaluation to support that kind of nimble, adaptive management at every single level of the work we do, at project level, program level, strategy level, not these huge, big, long evaluation studies and the slow management response. It's far too slow for the crisis that we've got. So let me show you a few of the resources that we have available to you to get started. In addition, we'll be sending out a PDF of the slides from this presentation, so you can have a copy to share with your colleagues. And of course, the session is being recorded, so we encourage you to have watch parties with people who need to see this. The Footprint Evaluation Initiative has quite a few resources. We have a guide. That thing in the top left is a guide on sustainability inclusive evaluation that covers a huge range of things that we have already worked on. We've got a guide for embedding environmental sustainability in M&E systems, and we've got various other projects that you can see on your screen, and there's a QR code there that will take you to the Footprint Evaluation website, which is hosted on Better Evaluation right now. Lots of useful resources if you want to learn more about this. And then finally, many of you may have been interested in the rubrics methodology that we use to apply the topology. We don't yet have that piece written up, that specific example, but these are some other examples of how rubrics have been used to draw evaluative conclusions, sometimes in human system type initiatives, but other times looking at environmental sustainability or both sort of coupled systems issues there. So plenty of examples, and also books and resources that you can access to learn more about that methodology. So that concludes the presentation section, and we are really looking forward to the question and answers sessions with you.
Thank you so much, doctors. And I just looking at my clock, I think we have 30 minutes to entertain some of the questions. I know that when you were registering, some of you also, shared some questions. So we have quite a lot of questions, but time probably might not be on our side. But allow me to just thank, Dr. Dr. Jane, Dr. Andy, Dr. Thomas for such a very insightful and even thought-provoking, interventions and presentations. We would not waste time trying to summarize what they were saying, but let me just maybe give the platform first to Mr. Tinashe Madamombe. I saw you raised your hand quite a long time ago, so probably now you're tired just raising it. I'll give you the platform first to ask your questions, but as a kind reminder, please, if you want to speak, please raise your hands. We have a look and we'll give you the platform to speak. But if you're a little bit shy, do not worry. Just type your questions in the Q&A and we'll be able to go through. We'll see how many questions we will tackle today. So, Mr. Tinashe Madamombe, the floor is yours. Please make your submissions and please try to be brief and straight to the point. Over to you, Mr. Tinashe. You can unmute yourself. Mr. Tinashe Madamombe. Raphael, may you kindly please unmute Mr. Tinashe Madamombe in case he's not able to unmute himself from his end. Thank you.
Okay, just give me a moment. I'm going to promote to panelists. Okay, now he can open his microphone.
Mr. Tinashe Madamombe, are you there? You can just unmute yourself and make your contributions. If not, I see some hands probably will come back to Mr. Tinashe. I see Peter Goebbels. Peter,
Okay.
you can unmute yourself and then make your contribution. Over to you, Peter.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, please proceed.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. A lot to absorb. So I have two related brief questions. One is that as much as we would like to address sustainability and equity inclusiveness, in my experience, there are often trade-offs, especially if you have participatory types of interventions. Trade-offs, for example, where small-scale farmers in agriculture are maybe tied into certain interventions that require high inputs, and they know they undermine the soil fertility and are not resilient to climate change, but they have to maintain their yields. And so, so there are a number of different trade-offs between the different sectors of a program. And I didn't really see you address that so much. Looking at if you want to advance on one sector, it might have effect on the other sector. And I'd like to know if you have a comment on that. And that's linked to the second question, which is, like you talked about 7-person team, you talked about an 8-person team. That's very, I've been a team leader with 4 people, and it's a problem. Especially I saw once mentioned the interdisciplinarity. That is very hard to do. And I was wondering if you'd like to make any comments, aside from just generally talking about capacity building, how to facilitate interdisciplinarity, because it's not easy to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Probably we can take another question, one more question from Wahed Mohammed. Wahed, may you kindly unmute yourself and make your contributions. So just try to be brief, please, so that at least we can go to the other questions and also give our speakers an opportunity to respond or to address some of the questions. Wahed Mohammed, please unmute yourself and make your contributions.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you loud and clear. Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, the moderators and then the instructors for this insightful webinar. So my questions go like this. From the based on the topic, sustainability, environmental sustainability and equity. Firstly, I just want to know, maybe is it the perspective of the resource person? Is it environmental sustainability? Is it like environmental impact assessment? If yes, because the way I look at the two things, the two scenarios, they look alike: environmental impact assessment and environmental sustainability equity. If it is yes, the way I perceive this is just like to attain environmental sustainability and equity. I think to address issues like this, it have to be looked and based on the perspective of the government, the NGO, or others. Because to ascertain it, the way I just see it is that it is there are some areas that are very complex that we need to look. And the way these discussions go is just like we focus mainly on agriculture, land and water, land and environmental resources. Why the area of biodiversity and wildlife is less considered. So if the environment,
thank you. Just try to wrap it up, Mohammed, so that at least it will give them an opportunity to address the question. Thank you.
So that's my question. If you are going to evaluate environmental sustainability, those areas of the wildlife and biodiversity have to be inclusive. So that's my question. I just want more insight on the area of this.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I think our speakers got you loud and clear. Thank you so much. So doctors, would you want us to take another questions, or you can take these two? I think they're a little bit mouth. So maybe over to you, and then we'll go to the chat. Over to you.
Let me make us, all these questions are excellent, and we need several hours to address these and more questions. We don't have them. I'm going to try and be quite succinct. On the point of the farmers have enough on their plate, just eking livelihoods out of the land that they have access to. I agree fully. We can't put environmental sustainability fully on the backs of the farmers. This is really a project or investment, a donor issue, is that they need to include in the project and require for the project the additional stuff that will offset, that will allow farming to be less harmful in net across the landscape or the ecosystem. So my response to your first question is I basically agree. I think farmers can do more, and many farmers know how to do more, but getting out of the economy versus environment is the responsibility of the funder, of the donor, of the project and the intervention. So that's where the change needs to occur. The other really good question is about team size. This was a large thematic evaluation, the IFAT evaluation. And one of the challenges we have, a colleague in the Northwest Territories in Canada, which is basically an Indigenous territory, has said that she gets to evaluate things like mental health on the land programs, and the budget for the evaluation is $6,000. There are challenges. We haven't solved the challenges of how to go small scale. In the Columbia example, most of the comparisons in IT energy efficiency are in large scale things like from Google or IBM, et cetera. We don't know how to do it for small and medium size. We don't know how to compare what is the best you can do in a small IT system that doesn't have all these huge additional resources. So there are challenges. That's sort of the frontier. It's something that is on our border. On environmental impact assessments and the subsequent question on wildlife, Many people turn to environmental impact assessments, and it's time we really started thinking about them clearly. Environmental impact assessment is normally done when a large investment is being proposed. And the value and or the subject matter of the thing that is being assessed is around that investment. Usually an investment to put in a hydro dam or something like that really doesn't consider coupled systems. It just focused on the investment itself. So EIAs have valuable information, but by no means are they sufficient. By no means are they a substitute what's going on. And many people who haven't worked in environment really are overly optimistic of what environmental impact assessments can do. But they're still valuable resources. And in terms of biodiversity, it is inescapable. It has to be part of what we do. So in agriculture, if you clear land, if you clear trees or clear land for agriculture, then you're doing several things. You're taking away sequestration functions of the trees. You're destroying, you're opening up land to divest itself of sequestered carbon, and you're ruining the habitat for biodiversity that biodiversity depends on, and not just wildlife, but also insects and birds and everything else. All of that needs to be considered. And we find that often it's people who live there who can give us the important observation information about what was there or what is there that is of value and what their function is. So absolutely, it needs to be included, and it's a very valuable point. Just briefly on the translation, why not in Arabic or beyond Spanish and English resources? Most of our work on footprint evaluation has been pro bono by the principals that you see before you and Patricia and others. We can work in Spanish and we can work in French now through our partnerships with the Canadian Valuation Society. The Spanish translations were possible because of our partnership with DVAL from Germany. We'd love to do more translations. We'd love to be updating our material before the translation, but we simply are not a funded organization.
Maybe just to add to that, if anybody would like to put their hands up and work on doing a translation of any of it, we'd be happy to work with you and make sure that you have all the knowledge that you need to create the translation. So yeah, if there's any resources out there to translate things into other languages, we would love to see them go further. I just wanted to add another couple of points relating to the questions that came up. One is like regarding interdisciplinary teams. One thing that we have found that's been very interesting as we have created a communities of practice and discussion groups among people interested in this topic is that many evaluators, quite a few more than you might expect, actually have some natural sciences background, but nobody's ever asked them to use it. I mean, I've got a degree in chemistry. I studied environmental chemistry as part of my major, you know, but like it's only been this work where that's kind of come into being. So, you know, maybe think about like try and find, it's not like one person on the team per piece of expertise. You can find people that have got combinations of expertise. And I think that's what we want to try and look for. Another one around the question around environmental impact assessments. We had an interesting project that we were involved in a couple of years ago, where for looking at a government sort of business development strategy, sort of developing the business sector. And there had been things like environmental impact assessments done at the front end of that strategy and various projects that came off it. But the thing that struck us is that often the environmental impact assessment is done up front to estimate what the possible impacts might be, but evaluations quite often don't check to see whether those impacts are actually happening. So that's a great opportunity for evaluators, is to look to see if any environmental impact assessment has been done already before a project was rolled out, and then see if, even if you're not able to check the data yourself, simply asking the question, is anybody checking to see whether these impacts that were anticipated are actually being tracked as part of the monitoring of the project? So that's a relatively simple and low cost thing that you can do that would really add value to the evaluation.
Just quickly on the interdisciplinarity question, just to highlight the experience that we are having in Colombia. So we were to create the evaluation design when we were discussing with the Colombian government about who should be part, the qualities of the evaluation team. We discussed with them the importance of having not only people experts in evaluation, but in doing good evaluation, but also people experts in IT systems, and also people expert in sustainability. So we were able to bring together 3 different groups that form the evaluation team, and they're contributing. And we have witnessed some very interesting conversations and cross fertilization of ideas, each one bringing their different perspectives and actually being able. But I agree with Peter. I mean, it's not an easy process. It's a complicated situation, but I think that's the only way to get it right, is combining the right knowledge and experience to do a good job. So
thanks a lot, doctors, for that additional clarification. Wyatt Mohammed, I suppose probably that's an audience. So I will read maybe 3 questions which has been posted like in the question and answer section. And maybe after that, I think we can do one last round from the questions you've been like submitted to us earlier. So this one is specifically to Dr. Jane. What opinion does Jane have on the extraction of lithium that is seen as clean energy, but that affects aquifer sites in other species? So it's a very specific question, Dr. Jane. And I think Gladys wants your opinion on this. Then the other question is, the examples of evaluation questions shared suggest treating environmental sustainability as a cross-cutting theme in evaluation. Are there advantages to including environmental evaluation as a standalone evaluation criterion, or would you always approach it in this cross-cutting manner? Then probably I can take another one. Speaking about sustainability, inclusive evaluations, you strongly focus on the environmental dimensions of sustainability. What about the social, economic, governance dimensions? Seems as if the anonymous attendee thinks that there is just only one focus here, more emphasis on sustainability. What about the other aspects? Well, this is a little bit longer, but maybe the last one. Based on the ongoing discussion on environmental sustainability equity, the discussion focused on agricultural land, water, environment as a whole. The whole area, but I think it's similar, if I'm not mistaken, to what Wyatt Mohammed is texted. So probably this is sufficiently answered, Mohammed. I'll skip this one and then go to the one from Mabele, who is asking, could you share some examples of sustainability and inclusion that you have come across and could be scalable? Maybe I can stop here for now and maybe give you an opportunity, doctors, to address some of these questions. Then we can proceed. I think we have 15 minutes. So maybe if you can address these ones, we can see if we can have another round of questions over to you. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jane.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I'm sad to say that I don't have the deep expertise in the specific issue of lithium to be able to comment on that question. You know, so yeah, I'm just gonna leave that. I don't know, Andy, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean,
which question, Jane?
I think that, you know, it's maybe there's a lot of, I mean, as we know, there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation going around about climate change and environmental sustainability. And one of the things that goes around is saying that, you know, electric cars are a bad idea because of the batteries and the, I don't know, the lithium or like whatever is required for this. So, you know, trying to imply that maybe, you know, petrol fueled vehicles are better than battery electric cars. There's some pretty good work debunking these myths. So, you know, I think some of this is like, obviously this, you know, there's concerns with lithium mining and so forth, but to say that therefore, you know, all electric cars are a bad idea, I mean, there's a lot of disinformation going on about that. I don't have the specific expertise to be able to go into the details, but you know, there's resources out there to look it up. But Andy, you may know more about this. It's just not my area.
Well, I think the key thing, and I've been around this space for quite a while, this is, you know, and questions like that are actually represent a tremendous advancement in progress and evidence that we should be optimistic and feel strong and vindicated. You know, you think of 15, 20 years ago, the type of, these things weren't even discussed. And then there was the euphoria, we have the solution, say electric cars or whatever. Reality sits in and there's trade-offs. We need to implement that and thinking, so that we need transport and we need to reduce emissions. And we're moving in that path. We're moving on that pathway. So we don't need to engage ourselves with trying to prove what approach is better than the other. Our job is really to say, okay, you're doing this. Here's the environmental and the equity effects of doing that, as near as we can estimate within our time and budget. And it's up to you to figure out what you're going to do about it. So the evaluation issue should be, there's real reasons to be optimistic. You know, we couldn't have had these discussions 10 years ago. It wouldn't have, no one would have come, you know, or few people would have come, but not much. Now we have guidance built in for the last decade into all of your programs and all your efforts that you're supposed to do it. Your organizations have been trying to do it. We're trying to add to your capacity to do it better and reflect and learn from it. We're on a pathway that should give us optimism. And that's where I sit. That's my position on this.
Okay, I'm trying to hold some of the other questions in my head. I don't think I got all of them down. There was rather a lot. But yeah, I mean, one was around, we're talking a lot about environment here, but what about equity and all the other considerations? I like, you know, this was primarily a presentation about how we can get sustainability into evaluation, because we see that, as Andy said, it's only included about 5% of the time. And typically what we see is it's often just included only for programs and policies that have environmental objectives. So and I think like one of the things that we need to do here is to learn from the journey that gender and equity have taken in evaluation. 30 or 40 years ago, if you said we need to look at equity in this evaluation, people would have said, oh, this is not one of those cultural programs, so we don't need to look at equity. This is just for the general population, or this is for economic development or something like that. We now know that even if there are no equity objectives, and maybe especially if there are no equity objectives for a policy or program or initiative, we have to look at equity, gender, and its various other dimensions in it. That realization has not yet come for sustainability, which is why we are focusing primarily on this here. But the key message that we wanted to convey as well is that sustainability inclusive evaluation is not like one whole package that now replaces everything else. it is another consideration that needs to come in alongside equity and the other things that you consider when you evaluate things. So we are not looking to push out anything else. We are looking to infuse them together. And one of the ways that we do that is to focus on the nexus between sustainability and equity. Like, so how, for example, impacts on the environment disproportionately impact marginalized groups and people in severe need or who are living in poverty or with lots of other disadvantages in society. And so how also the activities of the wealthy classes are doing the greatest environmental damage. So there's this big interaction between equity and sustainability that we need to keep front and center in our evaluations. And so, yeah, we focus more on sustainability here because that's been the missing piece. But the key is to infuse those and not to push the other considerations out, for sure.
Yeah, the other question was about whether to consider sustainability as a cross-cutting theme in all evaluation questions. And I mean, I think the examples we showed here is a way of on how you can actually think about sustainability in different perspectives in any type. When we show the example of the DAC criteria, I mean, we can embed sustainability, you know, and ask, as we said, coupled systems questions to any of the 6 criteria. But that doesn't mean that we have to, and we should, because, you know, sometimes it, depending on how complex the situation is, it might not be feasible. Then I think one of the pieces of information that we brought to you today was that think about what are the key things in the context of the initiative, program, policy, whatever you are evaluating, that relates to sustainability, and that you have people interested on. And so focus on a few key ones and look at them specifically. But of course, I mean, you can embed, again, sustainability in any type of reflection that you do. But we think that the important thing is to focus on a few key issues so that it's going to be feasible and doable without breaking the evaluation budget or timeline.
There's a couple of questions about, you know, is this mainstreaming, etc. Evaluators face way too many things they have to address. If you do a checklist of the things we have to do in an evaluation by various guidances and criteria and specific requests, it fills pages and pages and pages. You know, evaluation managers often say, we just can't take more on. We're already way overloaded. We don't have the resources, etc. And we just remind them, well, your country has made global and international commitments and national commitments to sustainability, to climate. We're just asking, these are countrywide requirements. These are countrywide policies. Therefore, they need to be included. Have you included them? Have you addressed them? If the answer to that, we need to ask that question in evaluation. If the answer to that is no, we simply say, okay, that's fine. We need to include this in our report, but we'll go on to other matters. So you can get started just quite simply by asking the interventions if they've lived up to national and international commitments that prevail within the country. In other words, we're saying get started. Get started. Let's work on this together. Let's share it. We don't have time to develop all the criteria and infuse it into mainstreaming, et cetera. As Jane said, 2030 is the project cycle we're on now, and systems are forecasted to start failing by 2030. So the matter is much more urgent than concerning about installing it into the evaluation infrastructure. What we're appealing to people to do, requesting and trying to support people to do, is just infuse it into what you do. And if I could, I'd like to make a pitch. There are a few areas that we know are critically important. One of them is agriculture. It's a major contributor of harm. Another one is forests, trees. A major contributor is sequestration, under threat from fires, from harvesting, legal and illegal, etc. Another one is construction and the unbridled use of concrete as opposed to more sustainable materials. And another one is procurement, where environmental effects, recycling possibilities, energy consumption is never considered in development investments that have procurement. We think these are 4 low-hanging fruit areas, major contributors to environmental harm, therefore major things for us to focus on. And Eval for Earth really centrally involves 4 agricultural organizations. Agriculture is one of the low-hanging fruit that we really need to address. So blatantly and openly and transparently, we are saying, let's work together. Let's join up instead of being separate. Let's figure out some easy, low-hanging fruit that we can do, perhaps rubrics, as well as other methods that we can, with modest investment, generate that can be used in all evaluations. So that's a pitch. The footprint evaluation would absolutely be joyful to join with your organizations in doing this. And we ask publicly, let's get together and let's do this.
Thank you so much, Dr. And I'm sure my colleagues from the 4 agencies, which you mentioned, FAO, WFP, the JEF, and CGR, I think they are hearing what your pitch, and they're hearing your loud cry, and I'm sure we'll be able to take it over even beyond this webinar. So let me also maybe take this opportunity to say, yeah, I mean, your presentation, doctors, has generated quite a whole lot of interest, a whole lot of questions. Unfortunately, because of time, we can't address all those questions, but I'll try maybe to ask you maybe later on if you can maybe respond in writing, and then you can share with the members of the community. But for the sake of time, I think after these concluding words from Dr. Andy on behalf of the speakers, I think let me just take this opportunity to say, to thank again Dr. Jane, Dr. Thomas, and Dr. Andy for such a brilliant presentation, and for the insightful exchanges as well. A big thank you again to you all for your active participation. As I said, I will kindly ask our speakers to see if they can respond to some of your questions in writing. I know the questions which we submitted when you're registering, and quite a number of questions which you submitted here. We will try to see if you can have some answers in writing, and we will share them through our community platforms, digital platforms. And quite a number of you were asking about the recording. Let me let you know that the recording from today's webinar, it will be available on the Evolve for Earth website. If you check in the chat box, I have pasted all the links. So for those who are not yet members of Evolve for Earth Community of Practice, please consider joining us. The links are right there in the chat. And also don't forget to follow us on our social media handles. We have the X, which was like former Twitter, and you're also on LinkedIn. Please consider joining us there. Thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. I think for now, it's a goodbye from my end. And for those attending Ideas Conference, I think I saw someone in the chat saying, are there an opportunity for us meeting in person? Yeah, we will consider that in 2025 and going forward. But if there are any members who are joining or attending the Ideas Conference next week in Rome, see you soon, where we are going to officially launch, Evolve for Earth, celebrating, the merger of these 2 great communities in evaluation. So from my end, thank you once again, doctors, and thank you all for joining us today. It's bye-bye for now. Stay safe.
Thank you, Innocent.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for coming.